Hi, it's Jan Beta, and today I'm going to try to turn one of these Amiga 500 keyboards into something like this, which is an Amiga 2000 keyboard, which also works on the other big box Amigas, Amiga 3000 and 4000. So I think this might be useful because the Amiga 500 keyboards are still relatively inexpensive. These are getting expensive as well, but they are more widely available than the big box Amiga keyboards. I'm fortunate enough to have this Amiga 2000 keyboard, but that's it. I don't have an Amiga 3000 keyboard and I don't have an Amiga 4000 keyboard, but those are all compatible. And as it turns out, they are also very much compatible with the Amiga 500 keyboard. With only a bit of finessing, we are going to be able to use an Amiga 500 keyboard on a big box Amiga. So that's the plan for today. Let's see how this goes. The Amiga keyboards are all very similar, really, even mechanically. The big box Amiga keyboards usually have the same keyboard membrane as the A500 keyboard that we are seeing here. They just have some rubber domes underneath the keys. There are other versions of the big box Amiga keyboards as well as the A500 keyboards, but these are the most widely used Amiga keyboards made by Mitsumi. There's a membrane under here with some plungers with some carbonized rubber that close contacts on that membrane. The membrane goes through this flat flex connector here into this little circuit board, and that's what we are going to be concerned with. The things I'm going to do today are going to work with all versions of these keyboards because the electronics are pretty much the same. At least the output is the same for all of these generations of Amiga keyboards. So these have a 6570 chip in here, which is a keyboard controller chip. And it's actually a 6502 processor-based microcontroller chip. So we have a little kind of a system on a chip here, which has some ROM that's programmable, it has RAM, it has a couple of I/O ports. So this is very useful for things like interfacing a keyboard matrix, which is brought in with this flat flex cable into the circuitry, to something that a computer can interpret as keyboard input. We also have some smaller logic chips here and a 555 timer chip, which is responsible for the reset signal. And that's going to be something we are going to be concerned with a bit more in depth in a second. There's also two LEDs on the A500 keyboards, which are the power LED and the drive activity LED, which are triggered by some transistors. And one transistor is this one here, is here to trigger the reset signal, which these versions of this keyboard have an extra connector for. This is really the main difference between the Amiga 500 keyboards and the big box Amiga keyboards. This connector here, which has more connectors than the big box Amigas. And the pinout of this, which I'm also going to link a website in the video description for to look that up, is we have a black wire, that's our clock, which is also generated by our 6570 microcontroller chip. That's a clock signal. We have a data signal, which is the actual keyboard data. We have a separate reset signal. We have a 5-volt supply, which is the orange wire. We have the yellow wire, which is not present on some Amiga 500 keyboards because it's just a key to have the connector keyed. The wire colors are just the resistor code colors, actually, as somebody pointed out in my comments recently. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is not connected. It's not even connected on the circuit board. I have no idea why they put a wire there, probably just because they wanted to keep the color coding correct for these resistor ring color codes. The green wire is a ground, which of course we need. We have a blue wire for the status LED and a purple wire for the in-use LED. So these are separate wires for the power LED and the drive activity LED. that we've seen on the little circuit board for this Amiga 500 keyboard. So this is the connector used for the Amiga 500. Of course, these keyboards are built into the same case as the main board of the Amiga 500. So we just need a little pin header connector here to connect it to that board. And we have the keyboard ready to use in the Amiga 500. The main difference between these Amiga 500 keyboards and the Big Box Amiga keyboards is A, the connector, of course, but B, they don't have the reset circuitry on board. So the Amiga 500 generates a reset signal which has this red wire as a separate conductor, whereas this little circuit with the 555 timer and the transistor here is on the main board for the Big Box Amigas. That's a very similar circuit, but that's not on the keyboard itself, it is on the main board. So in order to make this work with the Big Box Amiga, we have to make a little adapter wire to adapt it to the respective pin out and connector we need for the Big Box Amiga. And then we have to disable this reset circuitry, which we're going to look into later. Let me take a couple of seconds to thank the sponsor for this video, PCBWay, my favorite manufacturer of prototype PCBs of all kinds. They also do CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, you name it. Basically the company that makes everything. All of their products are very high quality, delivery is fast, and the pricing is really reasonable. So I highly recommend checking out the link in the video description should you be interested. Back to the Amiga keyboards. Let's talk about turning this into an external keyboard. So yeah, this is all fine and dandy, and you could use this with a little adapter and some modifications to the board with your Big Box Amiga without any problems. You just have to make a little pin header adapter and run some wires to a DIN connector that you need for your Big Box Amiga. But it would be nice to have a case, and fortunately there are some options available these days. One of them is the Checkmate case, which is a conversion kit for Amigas. Basically, you can convert your wedge-shaped all-in-one Amiga to a desktop form factor with the Checkmate cases. I'm going to link that in the video description. And the Checkmate people also offer this keyboard enclosure, which I have used with this keyboard for my Checkmate 1500 Plus case, and it works just by adapting the output from this keyboard to a DIN connector. So you just plug this in, the color coding is the same, and as you can see we don't have a yellow wire on this one because that's not connected anyway. So yeah, we just put this in here and we have our output on this DIN connector here. These keyboard enclosures are also available as a separate item from Checkmate. I'm going to link that in the video description. And as you can see, there's a DIN connector here. That's a 7-pin DIN connector, round DIN connector, which I'm going to make adapter cables for several Amiga models, as we're going to see. And just as an aside, I know that's not the theme of this video, but you can also use Amiga 500 keyboards with an Amiga 1200. You just have to remove the circuit board altogether. The A1200 and A600 have all the circuitry that's on this board here on the main board actually, and the keyboard is just the keyboard matrix with a flat flex connector. So in order to convert this to an Amiga 1200 keyboard, which has the exact same dimensions, you have to remove the circuit board. You have to get a new membrane for an Amiga 1200, which is actually not that expensive. I've seen some offers for like 30 euros or thereabouts. Not that difficult to get. You have to remove the plastic part here from this metal part, replace the Amiga 500 membrane with the Amiga 1200 membrane, which is exactly the same dimension-wise, but you have to cut a little slot in here, and you might have to cut some corners off here to make this fit the A1200 case. You have to make the ribbon from the keyboard membrane, which comes out somewhere like here on the Amiga 1200, make that fit through this keyboard bezel. But other than that, these are very, very similar. So you can actually use Amiga 500 keyboards without much modification in an Amiga 1200. Just wanted to point that out quickly. We are going to turn this into an Amiga 2000 keyboard because I have an Amiga 2000 here, and that is also going to work on the Amiga 3000 and on the Amiga 4000 with a little adapter. The first thing I want to do actually is to make an adapter to use this as a kind of testing keyboard for Amiga 500 boards. So I'm just going to adapt this DIN socket here to the pin header that these keyboards originally came with to be able to plug this external keyboard into an Amiga 500 board I'm working on. That's the whole purpose of that. And basically we're just going with the same pinout. I already wrote down the pinout for the Checkmate, which is, as I said, the same color codes are going to pins on the 7-pin DIN connector here. So I'm just going to solder a 7-pin DIN plug to a little cable. I'm using a piece of leftover network cable here because that is the only cable that has enough conductors to make this work. In my case, you can use better cables. These are available in all kinds of wire counts and thicknesses and things like that. This is just for bench testing Amiga 500 boards, so I'm just going to go the quick and easy route basically. I just want to have an Amiga 500 keyboard that I can quickly plug into a board to check things. So this basically is just me soldering a piece of network cable that I love using for these kinds of purposes to a MAS70 round DIN connector for connecting it to my Checkmate case, and then I'm going to crimp on an 8-pin pin header connector on the other end, watching the pin out. And I don't think I have to clarify what I'm doing here. I already determined which color of the LAN cable I'm going to use for which color here. Of course, the color coding is vastly different on these, but I hope I get things right. One thing I always forget, put the sleeve on first thing. Yeah, so let's go. So I managed to make all my connections here. It's not beautiful, but it's going to do. Okay, that's the Checkmate keyboard end. And then basically the same for the other end, just without the soldering. So I got all my wires stripped here, and I'm going to crimp on one of these 8-pin connectors, which is going to fit the Amiga 500 mainboard. Yeah, should be good enough. So I connected this to my Amiga board. Let's see what we get. Yeah, we get power LED there. That's a very good sign. Let's see if we can do a reset, which would mean that our keyboard data is correctly connected. Yes, reset works. This is going to be super useful actually. Let's see if the drive LED works. Yep. That is going to be very handy for future repair work. Yeah, and indeed, keyboard fully works here. That's nice. Now I can shrink the heat shrink here and call this one finished. This is basically just for stability. I'm also going to make a little dot on here for pin 1. Nice pin 1 marker, and then there we go. That should be that. Now for the Big Box Amigas, the pin count on the connector that's going from the keyboard to the computer is actually only 5 pins instead of the 7 pins we had on the Amiga 500. So what's that all about? Let's look at the pinout and see. So here's my notes about the keyboard pinouts. And on the Amiga 500, as we said, we have clock, data, reset, +5, ground, and 2 LEDs. Obviously, we don't have the LEDs on the Amiga 2000 keyboard or on any other Big Box Amiga keyboard. So we only need clock, data, ground, 5 volts. And we also don't have a reset signal here. This is the actual pinout from an Amiga 2000. As I said previously, the Amiga 2000 and the other Big Box Amigas, the A3000 and the A4000, have the reset circuitry on the main board. So in order to make this work, we only have to connect 4 pins basically on the 5-pin DIN connector, and we have to make the Amiga 500 keyboard think it is an Amiga 2000 keyboard. Let's take a look at the circuit again. So we talked about the 6570 microcontroller chip that's on the Amiga 500 keyboard here. And they actually used the exact same chip with the same hard-coded ROM on the Amiga 2000 keyboards. The only difference is that this has the reset circuitry on here. And in order to tell this that it doesn't need to generate the reset pulse that is needed by the A500 mainboard to actually do the reset, we just have to disconnect this reset circuitry basically. And for that I found several things online. We can remove this Q1 transistor, which is triggering the reset pulse basically, and the chip is going to be sure that it's connected to an Amiga 2000 and doesn't need to send the reset pulse, but instead send the reset signal. If you push the key combination for a keyboard reset, it doesn't need to send this keyboard reset, and the reset on the A2000 is going to work fine. I found a schematic for this that somebody created online. I'm going to link that in the video description as well, and it actually says in very fine print that you only have to disconnect pin 3 of this Q1 transistor in order to make the microcontroller realize that it's going to be used with an Amiga that's a Big Box Amiga and not an Amiga 500. So it doesn't need to generate the pulse. If you don't do this modification, the keyboard is going to work fine on your Big Box Amiga, but you don't have the keyboard reset. So I'm going to try that. I haven't tried this before. I'm just going to disconnect pin 3 on this and probably make it switchable so I can use this with both Big Box Amigas and Amiga 500s. Add a little switch here and see if we get a reset on the Amiga 2000 that I'm going to test this with. In order to make the Amiga 2000 keyboard work with the other Big Box Amigas, for the Amiga 3000 you have the same connector, exact same pinout, basically exactly the same keyboard, just with a slightly modified outer appearance. But for the Amiga 4000 you have a different connector. All you need to adapt this to an Amiga 4000 is one of these really inexpensive DIN PC adapters for a DIN keyboard to a PS2 port. These have the exact same pinout that the Amiga 4000 has, so you can just connect this end to the DIN plug, and this goes to the mini DIN that the Amiga 4000 uses and has the exact correct pinout for this. So this is really very close to a PC pinout, but the signals are different, so you can't use these on a PC. But you can use these adapters to make this work on an Amiga 4000, which is pretty neat and super inexpensive. So if you have a 2000 keyboard or a 3000 keyboard, you can use these adapters to make them work on an Amiga 4000. And of course, our adapted keyboard is going to work on an Amiga 4000 with this adapter. I'm going to make it so it has this 5-pin round DIN connector. So we're going to have to do some more DIN soldering at first. We're going to make an MAS70S, which is the Checkmate side, to MAS50, which is the Amiga 2000/3000/4000 side, and we're just going to wire this up according to my pinout scribblings here. And we are only going to need 4 conductors for this, so that's going to make things a bit easier soldering wise, and we're also going to use a better, more flexible cable than the network cable that I used previously. And I found this 6 conductor wire, which is pretty thin and flexible. And of course, if you want to do this without the Checkmate, you can always crimp on a pin header connector on here and connect this directly to your Amiga 500 keyboard. I'm going to do this for the Checkmate keyboard enclosure pin out, obviously. We're going to connect clock to our clock on the 5-pin DIN, data to the data, ground to ground, and +5 to +5 according to our pin out here. I'm not going to bore you with the details too much because it's just soldering DIN connectors to either end of this, which is going to be a bit of tedium again. Just remember to put the sleeves over the cable before you solder. So that should be our cable. Checkmate side, Amiga 2000 or other Big Box Amiga side. It's quite long, so I'm happy with how this turned out. And I think I made all the correct connections. We're going to find out shortly. So I dug out my Amiga 2000 from the corner there. And the caps lock LED lights up. Let's see if we get any keyboard activity here. This should now work as a normal Amiga keyboard, which it seems to do, except for the reset. It does work, all the keys work fine, but when I push reset, which I'm going to do now, nothing happens. This still thinks it's an A500 keyboard in this configuration without any modifications. And there is ways, so the caps lock LED works as well, which was to be expected because the 5 volts go to the correct line. The LEDs don't light up. As we've seen, these are special lines on the Amiga 500, so they are not connected at all at this point. And yeah, while the internal reset seems to work, if we push this, the caps lock LED lights up. So the little microcontroller tells it to light up, but we don't get the Amiga to reset because the reset signal is just going nowhere. It's not connected anywhere. So we need to make some modifications to the circuit board in order for this to work. There is another option to do this, to run an extra wire through this connector because we have a pin on this 5-pin DIN that is not connected. We could connect that to the reset line internally in the Amiga 2000, but I'd rather modify the keyboard a bit to make this work than to modify the A2000, which is far more valuable than the humble thing we built here. So let's look into that. So here's the circuit diagram for the Amiga 500 keyboard, for the Mitsumi keyboard. I have no idea if this works on other keyboards. They should be very similar. So the chip the 6570 should be the same chip on all Amiga 500 keyboards. And there should be a 74LS27 for the reset signal that just gathers the signals from the left Amiga, from the control and from the right Amiga keys. And if all those are pressed, it issues a little high signal to this transistor, which in turn triggers the 555 timer chip, and that generates a 1-second reset pulse. In the Amiga 500, this is generated on the little keyboard PCB and transported through the connector to the mainboard and then sets off the system reset. And we have a little note here in this schematic that I don't know who made this. Based on source by Nocache, transcribed by Scott Lawrence in 2018. Scott, I think, points out that we lift pin 3 on Q1, which is this little transistor, to make it behave like an Big Box Amiga keyboard. So we lift pin 3 on the transistor, that's the one that goes to the logic chip, and then this larger microcontroller should think, basically, if you can call it thinking, that it is in a Big Box Amiga keyboard and not issue this reset signal, but just transport the keyboard presses to the data, keyboard data stream, and then the Big Box Amiga is going to handle the rest internally. Yeah, we're going to have to lift pin 3 on this transistor to make this work as a fully functional Amiga 2000 keyboard. So what we're going to do is to remove the plastic from here to be able to solder on the circuit board. There's just 3 screws and a cable tie, and that should give us enough access to everything we need. So this is our Q1 and this is our 74LS27, and we are going to lift the leg that is connected to this chip. So this is our transistor here. Yeah, it's the leftmost pin from this side. So it's the rightmost pin from the other side. That's pin 6. According to our schematic, this is the one we have to lift. You can also desolder the whole Q1 if you just want to make this work on Big Box Amigas. But as I said, I'm going to try to make it a bit more elegant. And use it for different Amiga models. This is not some valuable kind of transistor, it's just a pretty standard one. So this is just a BC458, which is one of the most common transistors out there. So yeah, I'm just bending this out of the way and I'm soldering this back in with the 2 legs connecting the circuit board. So 2 legs back in, 1 leg floating. And yeah, if everything goes according to plan, I'm going to connect a wire there and a switch. So let's see if the reset works. Yes! That was easy. So we have, we made an Amiga 2000 keyboard basically. We can of course just close it up like this and use it on an Amiga 2000 or 3000 or with an adapter on an Amiga 4000. But I want to see if I can make this switchable between the 2 systems. So this should now not reset on an Amiga 500, but we can, in theory, reconnect the transistor and make that switchable between the 2 systems. So we have one setting for the Amiga 500 and one for the Big Box Amigas. That's what I'm aiming for. Let's see. I'm probably going to end up making a little backplate for this hole here in the Checkmate keyboard enclosure. That's actually here for using a Kira interface, which is converts an Amiga keyboard to USB, and that needs some outputs here that is pre-cut on these. So we have plenty of room to add a switch without getting very destructive here. I'm just going to try to do this as a proof of concept kind of thing, and I'm not going to make a backplane just yet. I'm just going to have dangling wires here, I think, just to see how well this actually works. I am going to do some fine tuning on this keyboard enclosure in another video, I think. So that's going to be for that video. We're just going to wire up our lifted pin on the transistor through a switch to the circuit board, so we can lift that leg virtually and reattach it to the circuit board. So this is just going to be a simple on-off switch, just connection, no connection. So I found myself a nice little switch that is also mountable in a backplate, should I ever make one. I'm just going to solder wires to this, one wire attached to the transistor leg and one to the circuit board. Pretty confident that this is going to work. So, back with the Amiga 500. So this resets as normal. On power on. Let's see if the keyboard reset works. Yep, that works. Okay. Switching the Amiga off. Flipping the switch to the other position. Turning it on again. And the reset doesn't work anymore. So this is the Amiga 2000 setup here. Okay, let's see if it works with the Amiga 2000, and that's it then for this video. Okay, back with the Amiga 2000. We're going to connect the mains. Okay, reset. And it does a reset. So that is switching between the Big Box Amiga and A500 modes now, which is exactly what I wanted. Yeah, this was kind of a proof of concept thing, and you can hopefully adapt this to your needs. As I said, you can of course do this without the keyboard enclosure and just use a pin header to connect an A500 keyboard to an Amiga 2000 or any other Big Box Amiga. I think that's it for today. Hope you found this useful, informative, and maybe a bit entertaining, and hope to see you again for another video on this channel. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed this. And special thanks, as usual, go out to everybody who supports me on Patreon and on Ko-fi and on PayPal and on the channel memberships page on YouTube. Thank you so much. These videos wouldn't be possible without your support. In case you want to give me some support, the links are in the video description. Nudge, nudge. Thanks for watching. I'm Jan Beta. See you next time. Bye. Reset. Thanks, unknown command.